Good evening from Washington, good morning in Seoul and Canberra, and greetings to all our virtual audience from around the world. I'm Marcus Garlauskas, the director of the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative within the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. I'd like to welcome you all to our virtual event, A Next Generation Agenda for South Korea, U.S., Australia Security Cooperation. Convenings like this one are integral to the Scowcroft Center's mission of developing sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most pressing security challenges facing the United States and the world. Our center is named for former U.S. National Security Advisor and U.S. Air Force General Brent Scowcroft, and we honor his legacy of dedication to the mentorship of the next generation of national security leaders. IPSI was established in 2023 and produces innovative analysis, conducts tabletop exercises and war games, and hosts other public and private convenings with key stakeholders to inform and shape the strategies, plans, and policies of the United States and its allies and partners, South Korea and Australia, of course, key among them, to address the most important rising security challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. With support from the Korea Foundation, the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative, which we call IPSI, has been conducting the third year of our Next Generation Agenda project series, led by our Deputy Director, Lauren Gilbert. You'll be hearing from in just a moment. The series brings together scholars and practitioners that are early in their career for a range of purposes, including to help them build their networks and expertise internationally, but also to share their insights and their fresh, innovative perspectives with a broader audience, including policymakers. I actually like to refer to the next generation participants as actually the now generation because many of our next generation participants are actually on the forefront in their professional lives of making a real difference. And so it's not that these people are coming next; is they're already in the trenches making things happen. And so in past years, our next generation agenda projects, they've focused on bridging Indo-Pacific and European perspectives on security, and on enhancing trilateral cooperation between South Korea, the United States, and Japan in the year before that. Now, this year, we convened rising experts from South Korea, the United States, and Australia to participate in a series of private roundtables that discuss challenges and opportunities for improving security cooperation trilaterally among these three partners. Now, I wish we could take the credit for anticipating how the Australia-Korea relationship would continue to advance rapidly and how much AUKUS and the potential for South Korean participation in AUKUS would be at the forefront. And of course, we could not have anticipated that there would be such a huge announcement on the potential for South Korea to produce its own nuclear submarines in cooperation with the United States, just like the plan for AUKUS to have Australia be producing its own nuclear-powered submarines. So I'd like to say again that we are a cutting-edge organization, and we're always thinking several steps ahead. But I can't claim that we were looking into our crystal ball, expecting this to happen just before the release of this issue brief. So this event again does mark the release of the issue brief, summarizing the key insights and actionable recommendations that emerged from the Next Generation Roundtable. So I encourage you all to read it. It's available on our website, and it's really a worthwhile but a crisp and quick read. And I want to thank our Next Generation expert panelists for joining us, including two of the issue brief co-authors, Kester Abbott and Hannah Hyewon Suh. And then, of course, we're also joined by project participant Unju Oh as a respondent, in addition, of course, to Lauren, who has led the project and was the lead author of the issue brief. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Lauren Gilbert. Lauren, in addition to being IPSI's deputy director, is the principal investigator and, as I mentioned, was the lead author for the issue brief. Now, Lauren's been leading our next generation work for the last 3 years. It's one of her signature elements here, and I really have enjoyed very much the last two iterations of our Next Generation series capstone events here in these excellent discussions. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the panelists and watching Lauren's expert leadership to guide the conversation. So Lauren, now over to you to moderate our panel.
Thank you so much, Marcus, and thank you again to everyone for joining us. As Marcus said, this is my third year now leading the series of a Next Generation Agenda, and it's a workshop series where we define areas in which flexible, action-oriented, and informal collaborative arrangements among these countries, these experts, these now generation, as Marcus said, leaders can provide mutual benefits, creating a basis for deeper and more meaningful cooperation moving forward. As Marcus said, this year we're hoping to expand collaboration and improve understanding among the United States, South Korea, and Australia, but primarily on focusing in actionable recommendations in which there can be more deeper and meaningful collaboration moving forward. So throughout the project, the Atlantic Council, with the Korea Foundation support, convened 2 private virtual workshops with rising US, South Korean, and Australian junior and career experts who represent the next generation of policymakers, academics, and private sector leaders who will operationalize this cooperation during their careers. So this next generation network discussed challenges, opportunities, and other items for bridging perspectives and bolstering both traditional and non-traditional cooperation and security. So based on the ideas raised during the workshop discussions, the participants offered concrete and actionable recommendations for a next generation agenda, with a particular emphasis on how policymakers, scholars, and private sector experts in each region can collectively implement the agenda. So the issue brief, as Marcus said, is live on our website, and it provides background on recent events involving cooperation before highlighting analysis of the key challenges and opportunities, followed by concrete policy recommendations. And I'm so excited to get into the meat of the discussion today. So I'll move forward with introducing my co-authors and respondent. First, we have Kester Abbott, who is a research associate at the United States Study Center, where he works on U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, defense industry issues, Northeast Asia strategic dynamics, U.S.-Korean foreign relations, and South Korean domestic politics. He is also a non-resident James A. Kelly Korea Fellow at the Pacific Forum and a member of the Korea-EU-NATO Next-Gen Policy Experts Network. Kester has also worked at a number of think tanks and research centers, including Chatham House, the East Asia Institute, Peninsula Diplomacy Group, the Yonsei Center for International Studies, and the Yonsei Center on Oceania Studies. Next, we have Hannah Hyun-seo, who is an events administrator at the Australia Institute with a background in international affairs organizations in Australia and South Korea. Hannah has previously worked with a range of organizations, including government-funded agencies, nonprofits, and think tanks in both countries. Her experience includes positions at Korea International Cooperation Agency, the Asia Exchange Association, and the Australia Institute of International Affairs. Her focus centers on foreign relations and diplomacy, particularly engagement with the Asia Pacific. And finally, as our respondent today, we have Eun-Joo Oh, who is an associate researcher at the Korea Institute for Defense Analyses. Prior to her position at KAIDA, she worked as an Asia-Pacific Fellow at the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs, Research Fellow at East Asia Foundation under the Global Asia Fellowship Program, and a member of the Voice of Youth program at Asia Society Korea. Her research interests center around international peace and security studies, great power politics featuring the United States-China strategic competition, and non-traditional security studies in the Asia Pacific. So as a reminder, everyone will be speaking purely in their personal capacity and not on behalf of their organizations. And one final note before we get started, later for our Q&A session, you can submit video, voice, or text questions at askac.org. So that's askac.org. With that, I'll turn over to Kester for his prepared remarks. Kester, over to you.
Great, thanks, Lauren. And I want to first say a huge thanks to the Atlantic Council and the really exceptional team at IPSI, and also to the Korea Foundation for making this possible. So as Lauren was saying, I think amidst a rapidly evolving strategic environment in the Indo-Pacific, security cooperation amongst like-minded partners has arguably never been more critical. The prospects of a more sophisticated trilateral security partnership between these 3 countries offers a promising component of addressing this declining security situation we're facing in this region. And I think these 3 countries in particular offer a diverse but complementary set of capabilities that have yet to be untapped together. And moreover, any trilateral cooperation, whether it be like AUKUS or the US, ROK, Japan, this trilateral depends on strong bilateral ties between the players, which is critical. Unfortunately for this grouping, and hence the focus of the report, there are, I think, growing foundations for this. And obviously, while there are ups and downs in a series of unpredictability right now, I think in many of the US alliances, its enduring 7 decades bilateral alliances with the region means that there are institutions and long, thick webs between the partners, between the United States and its allies that can ensure communication and dialogue. This isn't always the case for spoke-to-spoke relationships, and these relationships are arguably even more critical now. And South Korea and Australia, really in the last 15 to 10 years, have gradually built up these strong relationships that have made a trilateral grouping both a logical, if effectively operationalized, important grouping for security. So indeed, in more of the hard security space, in my own specialism and contribution to this brief, I'll be talking much more about the defense industrial cooperation element of this relationship, which arguably has formed a key driving element of both the bilateral relationship between Australia and Korea, and ultimately would be for the trilateral. So going back to when the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership was established in 2021, Moon Jae-in visited Australia to sign that deal. And that was, interestingly, only a few weeks after Hanwha Defence Australia had secured an Australian $1 billion contract to supply the Australian Army with field artillery units. And this was really significant because it was Australia's first major defence acquisition from an Asian country, and it was South Korea's first major arms sales into a Five Eyes defence market. Now, this isn't to say that these relationships has been smooth sailing. In fact, Korean companies have been left disappointed on several occasions over the last decades for failed bids or cancelled contracts, much as the C-3000 general purpose frigate recently happened. But overall, the relationship has been building, and they've actually really nurtured and developed that. And this is really becoming down to the urgency and changes in the strategic environment, which are requiring closer coordination, including with their respective ally, the United States. Now, this is really important because whilst the United States capabilities will be indispensable for sustaining deterrence in the region, its defense industrial base, which has historically underpinned credible extended deterrence, is being stretched. This is both to sustain other allies around the world, such as in Ukraine and the Middle East, whilst, of course, maintaining demand from its allies in the Indo-Pacific and, of course, itself. So one of the areas in this brief that we identify, which we think is very critical, is moving towards a more federated defense industrial network, pulling the resources, capabilities, and technical know-how of these countries to develop more sophisticated capabilities to ensure a balance of power in the region. And I think the logic for this includes the following options. As said, the United States defense industrial base is facing a significant pressures to surge in the face of growing demands for defense materials, countering China's growing industrial edge, and be able to develop and deliver vital defense materials to the US and its partners during a conflict. And of course, as we know, these challenges aren't new. For decades, US officials and defense analysts have warned of the cyclical budget debates, unresolved regulated bottlenecks, and a larger, slower acquisition process in the post-Cold War US defense industrial base. And so industrial surges have really only followed the outbreak of major conflicts, typically peaking after 2 years and receding once hostilities subside. Obviously, this is now changing as conflicts are becoming more protracted, but in the absence of predictable funding and sustained contracts, the US defense industrial base has struggled to expand, hollowing out critical competencies, shedding workforce, and really diminishing surge capacity. And on that note, it's unsurprising that since the 1990s, the US defense industrial ecosystem, has seen its prime contractors consolidated from around 51 firms to 5 and lost over 17,000 subcontractors. And by comparison, if we look at what's happening with China, last year in 2024, China had 370 ships and submarines, including 140 major surface combatants, compared to just 297 for the US. It's also important to note that 70% of China's warships were launched after 2010, compared to only 25% of the US Navy. Now, this isn't to suggest that China's newer ships, for example, are necessarily superior, but the US Office of Naval Intelligence estimates they are increasingly of comparable quality. And given the speed of development, this is very concerning. Therefore, I think leveraging the Allied growing capabilities to bolster and complement material shortfalls in the US DIB is especially pertinent. Intensive industrial edge, often such as in the case of many Korean firms, can be of near the same quality and even cheaper to help resource other US partners. There's also logistical challenges facing the US in sustaining its forward deployed forces in the Indo-Pacific due to China's expanding anti-access and anti-aerial denial capabilities, which includes long-range strike and subsurface warfare capabilities. So it's really reaffirmed the use of utilizing allied territory proximate to key flashpoints. But it's not just, for example, using Australia's strategic depth and its marshland or South Korea's proximity to those conflicts, but also utilizing allied capabilities. And as Marcus mentioned at the beginning, we'll be talking much more potentially about the prospects of a South Korean nuclear submarine enterprise. And lastly, I think really leveraging allies' growing capabilities also supports another key theme that has emerged in Washington and its alliances in the region, and that's the issue of burden sharing and ensuring allies can contribute meaningfully for national and allied defense. And certainly allies need to increase their defense spending. And Australia and South Korea are on this route. It was only a few days ago that Secretary Hegseth was praising South Korea's pledge and aim to increase to 8.2% within the next year. However, I think defense expenditures is more important rather than raw budgetary figures, but how these are allocated to develop asymmetrical capabilities. For example, if we pool all the defense budgets from the key US allies in the region, like Australia, South Korea, and Japan, it would be roughly 160 billion US dollars. That's about 1/8 of the US defense spending and roughly 1/4 of China's. So as such, it's really critical that we identify where especially finite resources amongst our partners, prevent overlapping, can really develop these capabilities, including repairance and maintenance of interoperable assets and larger, broader production diplomacy efforts within this group. And I really think that this trilateral grouping offers some really key advantages for that, which we'll talk more of. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Custer. I know we'll have a lot more to dig in there on the discussion, but I think we can go over to Hannah now.
Thank you for a kind introduction, Lauren. Good morning. I'm Hannah Hyewon-So, co-author of the issue brief, joining from the spiritual heart of Australia, Uluru. Before I share my thoughts, I would like to clarify that I'm speaking in a personal capacity and my view do not represent those of my organization. I would like to begin by reflecting on a significant moment of the regional order from last week. APEC 2025 in Gyeongju marked a significant milestone that underscores South Korea's return to international community as President Lee Jae-myung proclaimed at the UN General Assembly in September. The key question now is how South Korea can maintain or even build upon this momentum with its long-standing allies, the United States and Australia. Our issue brief offers timely and practical policy recommendation towards that goal. It outlines some of the challenges that the three countries face, and I would like to highlight two key challenges in particular. First, the difference in threat perception. Geography shapes the security priorities. Inevitably, North Korea shares South Korea's security focus, especially when the tension remains elevated as they are now. Australia, meanwhile, expresses a concern over China's military expansion in the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and heightened naval activities in Australia's exclusive economic zone. The U.S. is well positioned to manage challenges posed by both North Korea and China. In today's environment, with the growing China, Russia, and North Korea security axis comprising a comprehensive strategic partnership, alongside Washington's relative decline in influence in Asia and its America's first tendencies, even a mild misalignment could undermine the sustainability of trilateral cooperation. Second, contrasting risk tolerance with China. Here, the difference is stark between Australia and South Korea. Australia has been demonstrating a more proactive security posture through AUKUS. South Korea has been more cautious about publicly choosing a side between the US and China, particularly after the 2016 deployment of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense and significant economic retaliation. That said, one of the surprises from the APEC may indicate a shift. The President Lee's request and President Trump's approval for South Korea to develop nuclear power submarines. Whether this materializes will be an essential indicator of Seoul's strategic direction, especially in balancing the relations with China. Let's now turn to the opportunities, and this is where the trilateral security cooperation can truly distinguish itself. The most important message from our issue brief that I personally like to highlight is that this trilateral cooperation must establish the legitimacy beyond the three countries across the Indo-Pacific. South Korea and Australia often frame themselves as middle powers, which is valid relative to the US. However, within the Indo-Pacific, both are advanced, capable, and influential states. They have a capacity to shape the regional norms and contribute to mutual benefits as a proactive security providers. Therefore, this trilateral arrangement should not be perceived merely as a bloc responding to a great power competition, but rather as a trusted partner contributing to an inclusive and stable regional order. To achieve this, three countries should seek areas where opportunity lie and have focused on the non-traditional security issues in this issue brief. Non-traditional security issue and their solution offer the most practical starting point for trilateral cooperation. These challenges require multilateral solutions, offer less political risk, and provide credible alternatives to China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, enabling the effective leverage of assistance and soft power across the Indo-Pacific region. This is particularly relevant in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands, where China has been most active, and where all three partners bring complementary strengths. South Korea through ASEAN Plus 3, Australia through the Pacific Islands Forum under the theme of Pacific Family, and the US through the deterrence capabilities that neither Korea or Australia can independently provide. The trilateral must respond directly to local priorities. Climate resilience and disaster preparedness consistently emerge as the most urgent, hence the legitimate areas for cooperation. Both Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands are among the world's most climate vulnerable regions. Our issue brief proposes the three concrete recommendations for developing disaster-resilient infrastructure projects and early warning systems. First, a cloud-based disaster monitoring system linked to ASEAN and the Pacific mechanism to track natural disasters such as floods, droughts, and wildfires. Second, capacity building initiative, including a joint academies, exchange programs, and fellowships. And third, joint infrastructure resilience guidelines to support sustainable development. Together, this initiative provided tangible and community-level benefits, demonstrating the trilateral constructive security role on the issues that matters the most to the regional neighbors. South Korea, US, Australia security cooperation remains an evolving framework and in many ways a blank canvas. This presents us a rare opportunity to explore the full potential of the forward-looking security agenda that can be achieved together and carried forward to the next generation, including those who are in this event today. To finish off, I would like to sincerely thank the Atlantic Council and the Korea Foundation for providing this opportunity. And I also extend my warm congratulations to my fellow co-authors, Lauren and Kester, and contributors for this publication. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And thank you again to both of my co-authors for working so hard on this. And now we'll be going to Unzuo, who is responding to the issue brief at hand.
First of all, thank you so much for having me as a respondent. This is Unzuo from Korea Institute for Defense Analysis. And before I present my thoughts, I have to also make it clear that my presentation does not represent any of my institutional's idea. So building up on our previous discussions, I would like to share a few personal takeaways and highlight a couple of additional areas that could further strengthen trilateral cooperation. The first thing relates to just what Hannah also mentioned regarding local priorities. And I also think that the trilateral tie could become more outward looking by engaging with Southeast Asia and Pacific Island countries. So collaborative initiative on climate resilience, infrastructure, and maritime capacity building, would translate our cooperation into more feasible and even more profitable benefits. And also, what is more important is that it will foster greater trust across the Indo-Pacific. So by leveraging each country's strength, and then what I mean by this is the U.S. security partnership with the partner countries in the Indo-Pacific, Australia's diplomatic leadership in the Pacific, and also South Korea's expertise in development and infrastructure project, we can combine complementary capabilities to promote a more inclusive and sustainable development architecture in the region. And this broader action-oriented approach would also counter perception that trilateral cooperation is overly security focused. And my second point, I was glad that Castor already mentioned the hard security part really in detail. So I would like to touch upon the economic security part. And I think this is really increasingly important since economic interdependence is both a source of strength and also a source of vulnerability. As global supply chain and technology ecosystems become more interconnected, and what I mean by this is that it is becoming more exposed to external shocks or coercive measures, and the economic security has become central to how countries like South Korea, US, and Australia think about national and regional resilience. The three countries could work together to strengthen the resilience of critical supply chains, for example, in semiconductors, rare art, clean energy materials, and to promote joint research and development. Aligning approaches to export controls, investment screening, and responses to economic coercion would also help balance innovation and security. And thus, expanding into economic security would make the trilateral framework more comprehensive, forward-looking, and better equipped to address the evolving challenges of the Indo-Pacific. And one additional point I would like to touch upon relates to the differences in threat perception and national security priorities among the three countries. It was also mentioned in the issue brief, so if you're interested in, take a look at the website, and there's a whole publication there. And we've discussed in our previous vulture roundtables that how these differences sometimes make trilateral cooperation more challenging. But at the same time, I think it's equally important to consider how other players, including China or North Korea, perceive our three trilateral cooperation. Their own threat perception toward these three countries are not identical either, so understanding those perspectives might help us better anticipate their reaction and manage regional dynamics more effectively. So rather than viewing the three countries, US, Australia, and South Korea, as differing priorities as limitation or obstacles, perhaps we should think about how they might complement one another through shared intelligence, aligning strategic communication, and in identifying overlapping areas of interest. In that sense, diversity in perspective could become a source of strength rather than a limitation. And finally, my last comment relates to the idea of how to manage the sustainability of our cooperation. So in short, how we can ensure that the spirit of trilateral cooperation continue into the next generation. And as the title of our broader project suggests, the voices of younger professionals should be properly heard and valued in the overall decision-making process. Fostering next-generation network among early career policymakers, researchers, or professionals across the three countries could be a meaningful step into that direction. And this could take the form of joint fellowship programs, policy innovation lab, or exchange workshop like this that build long-term people-to-people and institutional linkages. But beyond simply creating opportunities, I think it's important to nurture and continuously train these emerging experts in, for example, like investing in their development so they can sustain cooperation over time. Trilateral cooperation depends not only on government coordination, but also on a shared understanding among future leaders. So these next generation network could help institutionalize intellectual and policy exchange, ensure continuity and trust even amid political change or abrupt leadership changes, and bring greater diversity of perspective, including the voices of women, youth, and regional experts. So overall, these focus areas, I think, could make trilateral cooperation more strong, not only in security sense, but also in terms of sustainability, inclusiveness, and resilience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Unju. And before we go into the moderated discussion, I wanted to remind everyone that you can submit your own questions to all of the speakers at askac.org. So please go and submit your questions there. Next, to move into the moderated discussion, I think I want to pull on something that several of the speakers mentioned, which is the submarine deal, which has been a hot topic amongst all three countries and on the internet as well. So Hester, I'd like to go to you first, as this is something that you focus on quite heavily. How does this deal implicate the larger trilateral security cooperation, and what do you see moving forward?
Thanks, Lauren. No, really interesting question. And as Marcus said, a very unexpected one coming out of the sidelines of APEC. And I think, first of all, it's important to note that this isn't set in steel. It was on a social media post by President Trump, and it's got a lot of approvals to go through. So we're going to see. And as we know, South Korea has really struggled over the last decade, if not more, in trying to grant equal treatment, for example, for civil nuclear fuel reprocessing, like other allies like Japan has, or really get those sort of guarantees that European allies at NATO have had. But that being said, this is actually an opportunistic time that we should really consider seriously, because the Trump administration's real emphasis on restoring maritime dominance, it's sort of torn up the playbook in many ways, and it's raising the possibility of a naval, for example, he's already raised the possibility of naval construction in foreign shipyards, and we've seen ordering icebreakers from Finland. So this is something we should actually take seriously. And it's also important to note that even when AUKUS was first announced, there was an 18-month period until the optimal pathway was finally established. So we're very much at the beginning of this. But in terms of the implications of the trilateral, well, this would be a huge development, as it would give South Korea a long-range capability that its diesel-electric submarines could not provide it with currently. And it would also more or less blunt the sort of asymmetrical advantage that China and North Korea have been developing with these similar capabilities over South Korea's military. I think also there are huge opportunities to bolster, one, the US submarine industrial base. It's important to note here that the Philly shipyard, where President Trump said that this nuclear submarine is going to be constructed, that was acquired by Hanwha Ocean only last year for $100 million. And it's pledged to invest in $5 billion into infrastructure upgrades. But still, these facilities have only so far built civil and surface naval combatant ships. It has a lot to redevelop in terms of providing a nuclear submarine capability. And meanwhile, as we know, the US submarine industrial base is really suffering. It's two private submarine shipyards in Connecticut and Virginia, for example. They'll need 100,000 new workers by the end of the decade. So I think by bringing in South Korean expertise, potentially, whether it's in the Philly shipyard or if there's further down the lines where these will be eventually transferred into capability building in South Korea itself, is going to be a huge boost to the US shipbuilding and submarine organization there. And this is actually really important. I think Trump's main effort, because when he posted that, he said, South Korea, I quote, will be building its nuclear-powered submarines in the Philadelphia shipyards right here in good old USA. And so that kind of shows that investment in sort of job creation in the United States has been a really big rationale. And I think it's really important to allies, including Australia, for that matter of fact, is to really show actually there's huge logistical advantages we can provide and bolstering those material shortfalls. So I think for example, given Australia's nuclear submarine capabilities are also much lower, I think there's a lot of opportunities for South Korea and Australia to coordinate on in-theater production and sustainment. We could have South Korean nuclear submarines, this is over a very long period, teaching technical know-how, sustainment in each other's ports. There could also be closer coordination in a contingency, because as part of President Lee Jae-myung's bid to have these nuclear power submarines, he told the Trump administration that these submarines could be used to, quote, track Chinese submarines. So there's huge opportunities for a wider array of security issues, which has often stumped this trilateral, given South Korea's understandable focus on the North Korean threat. So this is a huge development, and it's support of a broader security activities, which I think this trilateral is trying to achieve. So I think there are promising opportunities we should be looking into.
Thank you. I think I want to pull on that thread there of how this will impact the larger US PRC competition piece and what are the implications there on the Lee Jae-myung administration with its movements towards balancing much more. So I think, Hannah, you talked about that a little bit and how the strategic changes of the administrations could potentially be affecting the US PRC competition and the balancing amongst the three.
I think it's a very important timing, as in how South Korea portrayed themselves as a regional actor, coming back from the turmoil that happened from last December. And I think President Lee made a decision to balance out the focus a bit more to China, who was neglected or maybe kind of shined at the back during the last administration. And I want to just highlight the value of the practical diplomacy that Lee Jae-myung has been engaging and like actively pronouncing. It's just because APEC, as I said, is a perfect demonstration where Lee kind of balanced out his strategy with US engaging with the traditional alliance with investment and the defense industry, as Kester said, but also China not keeping China away from the main stage, but still engaging with them as well. I think it's kind of hard to say from very early at this stage of his administration because he literally just started this year. But I think one of the foreign policy goals that he proposed was try to establish the balanced role within the four neighboring countries that includes China and United States. So let's see how the Lee kind of proactively achieves that. But in my personal opinion, I would hope that Australia could also consider as an ally that could establish more firm role, given that Australia has been doing a lot of soft power diplomacy around their neighbors, especially the Pacific Islands. So hopefully South Korea could see the potential in it and then kind of expand the scope of diplomacy beyond the traditional allies that has been going through for the last decades.
Thank you. And I think one more thread I want to pull in that on Kester on what you were talking about is the training and the growth in industry on all sides that's going to be taking place. And Unju, you were talking about that a little bit in your remarks. And how do you see that shift going and the mutual benefit of the skills trade, if you will, between the Korea and the US, but then also likely Australia as well?
In terms of training, I also agree what Castor mentioned. There will be a lot of logistical advantage to in between three countries, US with South Korea or US with Australia. The bilateral coordination in terms of logistical advantage is obvious, but when three countries work together, that would all make sense. And that slightly links to the latest nuclear submarine. I know that was the hot topic last week. What my own personal viewpoints on that also is that South Korea in current administration, the key point is pragmatic approach. I know the terminology could brings a lot of interpretation. What is pragmatic in terms of South Korea or US or Australia? But in and itself, that the last week's discussions with nuclear submarine planning would imply that in a way Korea is willing to accept the more proactive role, and in terms of US as an US ally, Korea will be more actively working on in the Pacific as a middle power player. But that and also this means that when viewing with the US PRC competition, it does not necessarily mean that South China is leaning towards US as not on PRC. It's more as in between strategic player. South Korea will in and itself as a whole its own player working on its national security priorities. So it will be not just containing North Korea or contain China in a representative of U.S. ally. It means that South Korea in whole player is working on its own idea, and when that planning will become true, that logistical advantage or personal training or intellectual exchange would foster in between three countries. So in a plain ideological way, that makes sense, but when it comes to actual planning or strategic planning, tactical planning, then it will take time. But we have a lot to go. But thus far, after the 6 months of the Lee Jae-myung administration, the whole idea of South Korea becoming more proactive player in the region and more pragmatic leader in pursuing its own national security priorities, that thing is went well. And in between North Korea and China, risk, if I may say, that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. And then I wanted to go to Hannah as well. Speaking of the Lee Jae-myung's pragmatic diplomacy, another foundation that he's started on is what you mentioned earlier, is focusing on Southeast Asia, Pacific Islands, and how we can expand out further there in diplomacy. So as you were saying earlier, ASEAN is an institutionalized foundation that the trilateral partners can go into to address these non-traditional security concerns. Can you elaborate on what programs you think would be the key elements? I know you mentioned sensors, et cetera, but what are the direct ways in which they can use ASEAN as a platform, or even the Pacific Forum, to build up this non-traditional security cooperation?
I think the commonality between the ASEAN and Pacific Islands is that they already have well-established programs that was set by each country's institutions, such as Korea, it will be COICA, and for Australia, it will be DFAT, who are working on field, try to demonstrate the soft power and also try to train the next generation professionals who are looking for more advanced knowledge and technology. That's the reason why that I mentioned one of the programs, one of the points that I mentioned was about like joint academies and fellowships and exchange programs, just because I think the infrastructure in terms of self-power mechanism is already there. It's more about how to merge it in a common standard between Australia, Korea, and the United States, so that we can build a hub, I guess, as in the professional who can bring it up, the discussion about the importance of the regional order as a bloc, continuing to the next generation. I think it is important. I value the human resources a lot, and I have met a lot of people from ASEAN countries and also the Pacific Islands who were looking for more opportunities to look for a new partner to cooperate, and one of them is South Korea. And I really hope this exchange between people can actually make it into one cohesive system that could be like the one who is from ASEAN or the Pacific can also be in the system of South Korea, US, and Australia, and build upon the network from there. And yeah, I really hope that kind of exists and continues, and kind of established as a more of a systematic mechanism by governments or the government institution.
Thank you. And then Hester, you also mentioned Southeast Asia and how that's an opportunity for shipbuilding and other maritime security elements. Can you talk a bit more about why Southeast Asia is a key area for that cooperation and how you think the different countries can leverage their resources and skills to that issue?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. So Southeast Asia, much as Hannah was discussing, it also offers a natural sort of midpoint between the United States, Korea, and Australia, given the geographical challenges, but given the interest and sort of convergence of economic and trade routes in that region. Particularly players like the Philippines, which is more aligned with the three countries' strategic overall objectives. I think that's really important, but of course, more broadly engaging other partners throughout the region. In terms of the shipbuilding or moving towards a more collective shipbuilding enterprise, by this, what we mean is that, which we discussed in the brief, is that currently the level of freedom of navigation operations, while they've been on the uptick in recent years, they just can't sustain that sort of year-round presence to uphold our Southeast Asian maritime partners' maritime sovereignty. So by this, it would be much better to have in-theater capabilities that could be either having the actual infrastructure facilities to develop, offshore patrol vehicles, for example, which South Korea has already been doing. But there's been really issues, I think, between the three players and really aligning production timelines or where our resources can go, because often Australia and Korea have found that they're actually been competing, such as Hanwha and Austal, over bids for the region. And also, Australia and the United States are at maximum capacity for shipbuilding. So the only thing they can really provide for Southeast Asian partners is second-hand vessels, which, given the developing upgrades that we're seeing with the Chinese Navy, it's really limited of what Southeast Asian partners can do. So one way to mitigate this is to really leverage South Korea's developing and really world-leading capabilities, shipbuilding capabilities, whilst at the same time the United States and Australia can move into developing port infrastructure or workforce and training or broader P8 maritime patrols, for example, to bolster Southeast Asian partners' intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. And I think if we really have a divergence but a common overlap between these capabilities, we can really leverage our respective capabilities.
Thank you. And then, Unju, you were talking about the economic aspect of it all. And I think this maritime aspect is a huge interwoven interest area between the three countries. And particularly when you're looking at it as a technological collaboration or even scientific cooperation element of it. So, how do you see that element from an economic security perspective?
Um, economic security element in maritime area would be economic security in and itself is not hard security, so it's more linked to national disaster or disaster and resilience aspect. And in that sense, when we can think about joint exercise or joint project with Southeast Asia or even Pacific Islands between Korea and Australia. And I know that Australian Defence Forces, they are working on national disaster resilience efforts in neighboring countries, including Pacific Islands. And South Korea also can give some knowledge or training when it comes to securing maritime zones or maritime borderline and not more maritime resources, natural resources to protect the sea levels and the temperature and all, and not just in resource protection, but also, like mentioned before, natural disaster. South Korea also experienced a severe flood this year, so we can share the know-how or intellectual management skills with other neighboring countries, and in that way we can sort of furthering our economic security wise, and also in terms of technologies sense, what's important is securing critical supply chain resilience, and especially in terms of semiconductor critical supply chains. We can think about how to build a resilient critical supply chain regardless of the external risk factor, mainly due to China's active accessions in technology sectors. So building up an resilient critical supply chain mechanism is really important, and I guess in that sense we can build a resilient mechanism with Australia's these resources, South China's expertise, and also U.S. leadership. So in that sense, economic security in technology sector also could further.
Thank you. And to go back a little bit to the climate, the non-traditional security issues, we've been seeing some examples of the PRC arguably using climate action as a bit of a smokescreen to cement its dominance, particularly economically, in the region. And as these regional threats and the larger concerns around economic issues, around climate issues, how do we see the three partners coming to counter these emerging issues while also maintaining a sort of status quo, if you will, in the current situation with the PRC? Hannah, I think I'll go to you first for that question.
Yeah, that's a great question, by the way. It's just for my answer would be offer these three countries could provide a legitimate or maybe even alternative to choose from China's ambitious hand for offer, I guess, for climate action. It's just their ambitious plan with investment for climate resilient infrastructure or financial support to help the government to deliver those kind of programs or infrastructure makes the China's Belt and Road Initiative more stand out, especially in community level. But I believe the Australia, US, and South Korea have enough fund because they're already doing those kind of things from different government institution, and they have other like expertise professionals who can help out with spreading out the knowledge and technology that was already happening from their home country as well. So it's more of a matter of, as I said, how do we make a joint system that could be an alternative, or maybe providing a choice for the Pacific Island countries or those who are in the danger of climate disasters, I guess, to have an option, trying like to emphasize the messaging that China is not the only option they can choose from. There's actually another one that they can be trusted and who have been present in their community for many times.
And on that, we have seen some growth in the harder security collaboration there as well. I know we saw exercises taking place in PNG and how that was taken on as a joint project, if you will. So Kester, how do you see these exercises that are branching out further beyond, Australian land, Australian maritime areas? How do you see these growing the relationship amongst both the countries bilaterally, but then also trilaterally?
Well, thanks, Lauren. I think, well, first of all, having as many like-minded partners and those on the within Australia's near abroad, if you will, is really vital for boosting interoperability and just general military hardware capacity building in the region. But on a second and a more diplomatic note, I think it really sends a message to the region that these aren't some sort of alliance containment strategy by the United States partners. These are general shared mutual challenges that are facing the broader region, including those partners in Southeast Asia who are more comfortable perhaps in straddling both the Chinese and the United States. I think by working with these partners, PNG you mentioned, but also the Philippines or Vietnam, I think we're really underscoring the importance of maintaining a regional rules order based order in the region, and that these sort of violations, as you mentioned, the Chinese doing in the climate sector, but more broadly, isn't in the interest of much of these partners or the majority of these partners either. And I think just to slightly divert the question and going also back to the previous one, not that I'm an expert on climate, but I think both the combination of like military exercises, but also broader institutions like CPTPP, for example, whilst this is mainly a trading organization to promote trade amongst 13 partners, which Korea has signaled interest increasing under the EJMM, I think environmental standards or ways of trade, and of course the military exercises really are going to bolster shared values amongst the region. And I think as many partners as we can get, not just the 3 countries, but we'll really send that message to China that this isn't some sort of containment strategy between the US or an Anglophone sphere or its allies and partners, but really throughout the region. And I think Southeast Asia is critical to that mission.
Thank you. And we're almost out of time in the moderate discussion section. So a reminder that you can leave questions at askac.org for any audience questions. So I think I'll do one final round of questions before we move to those. And I'm going to ask each of you the same question. And I know it's difficult because we had multiple hours of conversations throughout the process of this project as a whole. So what if you could add another recommendation, or if there's a recommendation that you wish you had made it in, but there just wasn't enough word space, what recommendation would you put in? And I think I'll start with Unju as well.
So if we think about the extra additional recommendation, I would like to say maybe we can think about the other examples of different trilateral cooperation. And the first thing that comes up in my mind is United States, Japan, and South Korea trilateral cooperation. Maybe we can think about the commonalities or differences between that example and this one, this US, Australia, and South Korea example. To me, the previous US, Japan, and Korea, that trilateral example, that was quite successful example of starting as an each distinct countries, but into a very very secure institutionalized trilateral cooperation. And the 3 countries also made a Washington Declaration on that note. And maybe we can think about how the commonalities, like the shared ideas or shared areas of interest, and then we can apply this to current US, Australia, and South Korea trilateral cooperation. Maybe the commonality is that they are all located in the Indo-Pacific region, the Pacific areas, and then share the both common security threat perceptions, maybe slightly different priorities, but also like-minded countries under the US ally. And the different agendas would be Japan has its own priorities, and then we also welcome the newest prime minister in Japan. So maybe their domestic politics or priorities in terms of security and defense strategy would be different, but maybe we can think about some lessons from the previous institutionalized 3 partners cooperation and get some lessons from that one.
Thank you. And then Kester, over to you next.
Thanks, Lauren. I would say space cooperation is actually a really opportunistic area. I think the Indo-Pacific faces a lot of mounting threat, North Korean missile provocations, growing Chinese space and missile capabilities, and really an increasingly potential for crisis escalation. I think for Seoul, it really wants rapid deployment and the renewal of its surveillance assets, and that would be especially important in wartime. And meanwhile, Australia, it seeks to augment its sort of sovereignty in space surveillance, intelligence gathering, and secure communications, particularly as it modernizes its defense sector and responds to threats in a really vast maritime space. And I think both powers are now increasingly being classified as new space powers. And I think there's a real opportunity for joint projects for rapid innovation cycles and skill building and sovereign manufacturing. And I think Australia's geographic position close to the equator sort of offers an optimal launch conditions for, orbital vehicles, which lowers the cost for kilograms and enabling launches more efficiently. And I think its sparse population compared to Asian territories like South Korea, it's much safer. And I think it's further away from geopolitical rivals compared to South Korea. So I think that's a real opportunistic area. And we're already seeing developments like last year, Hanwha Defence Australia, Hanwha Aerospace, and Gilmore Space Technologies here in Queensland. They've signed a memorandum of understanding to sort of foster innovation, but there's much more that can be done. It's happening much between the private sector, and the Albanese government here in Australia hasn't really taken that sort of space element as seriously. It cancelled in June 2023 its national space mission for Earth observation and cut 1.2 billion Australian dollars. So I think while private sector is really like forwarding this objective, I think more can be done from the leader to leader level.
Thank you. And last but not least, Hannah.
Definitely last but not least. Actually, the point that I want to raise probably related to the issues that I already mentioned in the issue brief. But if I have an opportunity again, then I would love to include a section where I can mention about the humanitarian aid assistance. It's just nowadays, I think humanitarian aid in general by a single country, it becomes a bit more pressuring for one country to afford, and also USAID has closed down. So there was a lot of concern about how the USAID system, or maybe actually the aftermath of that, will be projected to the ones who are getting received by USAID. So considering that aid itself is a bit pressuring scheme for a single country, a single government to handle, and one of the most influential country in the world, US, has closed down the program of USAID, how about we also think about the joint initiative for humanitarian aid system? It will be a question mark and also a lot of things to consider about how we can make it possible in terms of how trilateral cooperation can financially support that system. But I think financial assistance, especially those who are in climate crisis or any other crisis, thinks the financial aid is the most kind of attached agenda for their daily living. So I just wanted to mention financial aid, or even the medical supplies that who needs the hardware material, and for their daily basis. I think if we can think of a system that trilateral cooperation can think of together, then that'll be awesome.
Thank you so much. And I think an area that we can pull on there, I'm seeing a bunch of questions come in through on the chat. So a question actually did also come up on space, Kester, so you beat them to it. But how can we use these new technologies that are viable for security, such as the space cooperation, such as, for example, something that hasn't come up yet, AI, which is a part of Pillar 2, and how can we use those in a dual use scenario? So for example, if we're using it for both security, navigation systems, but then also for these non-traditional security areas for natural disaster relief, etc. So Hannah, I might continue on with you there before going on to the next person.
So the question is how to utilize AI more effectively in the field of traditional and non-traditional issue. Am I correct?
Other critical and emerging technologies, any areas that you can be viewed as dual use and effective both for national security, but then also non-traditional security.
Whoa, this is a really interesting question because I mentioned that AI system in a natural disaster monitoring system. It's just because I think AI is the only system that I can think of that all countries are actually using it, like even by the general public. So I think this like integrating AI into system would be awesome. It's just the non-traditional. I'm more used to talking about non-traditional issues, so I will just take onto that and toss it over to someone else for traditional issues. But with AI and non-traditional issues, I see more value in it. It's just because, of course, there is an issue about how biased the information is in terms of like who is having an access to it. Like even like there are some countries who are struggling to have a basic internet connection in the world. So that will be a kind of dilemma that we would need to solve before we think about how we use AI use. But if the government itself government institution who could afford the AI mechanism into system can think of the way to integrate non-traditional issues, not about the climate, but also like, as I said, medical assistance as well, then I think I see more benefits and more potential with using an AI in non-traditional issues as it is a communal mechanism that everyone can use.
And then Kester, over to you. Critical and emerging technologies, AI, quantum, 5G, how can that be used in more in the trilateral partnership, in bilateral, even with AUKUS Pillar 2, and how that can be used in a dual use sort of system in which it's not causing as much tension necessarily?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Whilst I'm not a huge expert on the non-traditional sphere, I imagine there would be huge opportunities in quantum computing, which Australia is increasingly becoming a leader on. And I think for example, going back to that point about space, I think if we have faster and more integrated information sharing that quantum has been allowing us, I think partners throughout the region, including these three countries, could really bolster intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. That's not just used for combat and contingency operations, but also, for example, here in Australia with disaster risk reduction or climate observations. And this is also key to Southeast Asian partners where issues of climate is really important. So I think if we really have much more near-time observation, which partly AI and quantum computing are providing, I think there's huge opportunities there which can be used for both. And of course, given the dual technologies, once these have been advanced, they could be switched they would likely be switched to a conflict or contingency. But during peacetime, there wouldn't be any issues, I think, for those more immediate climate and observation issues that all countries in the region are facing.
Thank you. And then Unju.
I think the only part that was not mentioned is the norm and governance part of the AI and in terms of critical emerging technologies. And I guess the governance and norm perspective is really important because to me the PRC or China-led other countries are influencing their own idea or their own perspective interpretation towards their friendly countries. And then I think that's one of the most dangerous risks in terms of rising advanced technologies. And for that example, we also had that REAIM, Responsible AI and Military Domain Summit. So that's one of the most popular example when it comes to AI governance and norms. And I think when we are building or making consensus norms or governance rules in terms of AI governance or other dual use technologies, I think the US should be the leading role in making the norms, and other like-minded countries will follow or in a way actively participate in that procedure to making credible or sustainable norms that also covers the ethical issue or financial issues and all. And in terms of South Korea's example, President Lee promised that Korea to become a leading pioneer countries in terms of AI technology, and he promised, I think it was over 10 trillion won over in his presidency. So maybe we should look for AI or maybe space too, but all that kinds of advanced technology would be the promising area for South Korea or other countries like US and Australia to make rooms for future opportunities.
Thank you. And on that note, with Pillar Two, several of the working groups, there has been some discussion on other countries joining in these working groups, either as observer countries, or other non-formal AUKUS members, in order to build up these ideas, these capabilities, but then also building further collaboration. What do you see as the either barriers to countries such as South Korea joining into AUKUS Pillar 2, or do you think that there is movement towards joining as well? So I think, Hannah, I'll go to you first.
For me, I think the answer is simple. I think once the South Korea joins the AUKUS Pillar 2, that will be a clear indication that South Korea is willing to work closely with the United States in security matter, even more than they used to be. And I'm not too sure in terms of how President Lee will handle that, given that he's been publicly mentioning that he will be balancing out U.S. and China, and especially he made a statement where there's no the statement of like security with U.S. and economy with China is no longer valid these days. I'm not too sure whether President Lee will take it in that traditional way that joining AUKUS Pillar 2 was a clear statement or indication of South Korea associating that. But I would imagine that if there is a chance and if there is a situation that South Korea joins the AUKUS Pillar 2, there'll be more of a technology cooperation that South Korea have been looking for with the broader partner to collaborate with in their critical technologies field or shipbuilding. They are the industries that South Korea wanted to pitch to many other countries, not only Australia, but also other countries in the world. So I would love to see how President Lee handles that situation, but I think AUKUS Pillar 2 would be joining or not. The AUKUS Pillar 2 would be a good indication. A, South Korea would take a situation about more proactive security leader in the region, and B, how would they handle with the other security axis like China, North Korea, and Russia axis.
Thank you. And then Kester, over to you.
Great, thank you. I think an issue with Pillar 2 writ large is that it doesn't have the AUKUS sticker that I think the nuclear submarines kind of provides. And with the optimal pathway and with that sort of capability, there are exact timelines you can go towards and what does progress actually look like? Pillar 1, that sort of shows where progress is going or where it's being halting. Pillar 2, however, is much more vague, and it's expanded from its original 4. In 2022, it went to 8. And the sort of scope of the parameters of this grouping, it just keeps expanding, and there's not enough focus or where actual capabilities can be invested in, which is a real big problem. Now, what South Korea and Japan's capabilities and really leading technologies and expertise on this can perhaps help channel or navigate where exactly these partners can really leverage their strengths and really focus their resources on. But also, I think, unlike Pillar 1, which has dedicated bureaucracies to managing the nuclear power submarine, AUKUS Pillar 2 doesn't have that. So I think one way in which adding partners could benefit AUKUS Pillar 2 was, okay, it could perhaps ignite more formalization or institutions, I think. And for example, a lot of information knowledge is kind of lost when bureaucracies move or if they lack them. I think the UK has been sort of on the forefront of trying to kind of make this more organized. They have an actual dedicated team, whereas in the United States or in Australia, it's sort of different bureaucracies moving together. So I think by adding on players, it may jettison more bureaucratic fluidity and formalization that I think will be really critical. And lastly, dedicated funding. This has been a really major issue, and how to leverage the private sector and universities. There was huge optimism at the beginning of AUKUS Pillar 2 that suddenly it was going to reduce defense industrial barriers, and new capabilities that universities are developing could be put into the hands of the warfighter. But this didn't really materialize, and really it took 3 years since the start of the announcement to really get funding moving. And I think South Korea's world-class dedicated, and other players for that matter in Japan and elsewhere in the region, can really unlock these potentials and giving their capabilities to this. So I think there'll be extra pools of funding, which is really critical given China's dominance in these areas. So I think by including Korea, whilst I think we still have a long pathway to go, I think it could bring up some new conversations on how we can better formalize this and really sort of start attaching those stickers to what actually progress looks like.
That's a great point. And on tangible progress, we recently saw the movement on critical minerals between US and Australia and how that can really factor into some of these Pillar 2 issues. But then also on supply chain resiliency, like Unju was mentioning earlier. So Unju, how do you see this deal and the potential investment from PRC critical minerals, and how do you see this changing some of the aspects of the trilateral cooperation or even South Korea's own semiconductor industries, etc.?
I think critical mineral resources is one of the severe realm or sector in terms of US China's strategic competition. And Australia is really known as the has plenty of natural resources in terms of rare earth materials. And the recent deal or the investment signals a lot, because it once again tells us that the joint investment or joint deal is not just for the bilateral coordination or the benefit of the countries, but also it signals that the countries are actively building up the supply chains, the resilience against the external potential risk that could spring from the China's or other countries. And in that sense, it's not just for the economic or financial sector, but it's also we need to think about the security perspective in looking at the latest deal. And the another thing that hit my mind when I was listening to the discussion was that during our previous discussions about AUKUS Pillar 2, the personnel issue was one of the biggest challenges that the countries and the AUKUS members are having problem. And I guess maybe the expertise in South Korea's knowledge or intellectual could be another window of opportunity for the AUKUS members to further develop their own security partnership. So, and in that sense, South Korea could join as an observer level in Pillar 2. I know Pillar 1 is the bar is really high, so maybe Pillar 2 is more feasible option, and maybe South Korea could open or initiate some observer project or strategic communication with the members of the Austrian AUKUS. And I think I just mentioned the critical supply, the critical minerals. So yeah.
Thank you. I think turn to Hannah next about how the critical minerals, how this deal can affect the trilateral cooperation.
If I'm being really honest, I wasn't really on top of the topic with the critical minerals, if I'm being honest. But I think given that there is a discussion about expanding or maybe like critical mineral is like one of the biggest industry in Australia, but there's a topic about like there's a discussion about this with the US is a could be a good signal. I'm not too sure, but yeah, I will just hand it over there. It's just because critical mineral is something that is very topical, but also do can be different within the Australia. It's just speaking from someone in Australia, critical minerals could be something very controversial as well and topical within Australia. So I'm just gonna finish there.
Thank you. And then turning back to Kester.
Thanks. I'm also not a critical minerals expert, but I do understand that China's sort of lead in this area is very much concerning, given that it controls about 70% of rare earths and 90% of the global reprocessing. So I think the deals that the United States and Australia are creating, and also other global deals broadly, such as Ukraine, the United States, is really opportunistic areas I think we're building, and we're trying to, de-risk those supply chains is really critical and important. I think there is also overlap and opportunities with other players in Northeast Asia for Australia, where they've already been supplying rare earth materials and metals. I think given sort of Korea's expertise in those sort of tertiary areas, I think there's much overlap that can be provided. But also, Korea is also very much going down the semiconductor route, and it has been a leader in that area. So I think there are huge opportunities to work more closely with Australia in ensuring those sort of materials that are really critical to those industries get there as well, not just for the United States, whilst that's important, but we can really integrate that as a part of the trilateral group.
Thank you. And we actually had a question on the United Nations Command and US Forces Korea. So I think Kester, I'll also turn that back to you. Now that we're seeing further Australian leadership in UNC, how do you see the defense cooperation building between Korea and the US, but then also with Australia as a lead force in that cooperation?
Yeah, so first of all, it's important to note that whilst Australia has been really improving its position on the Korean Peninsula and broader Northeast Asia, its capabilities are still very much needing to be developed beyond the Philippines. There's still a focus which has been highlighted in its national defense strategies, such as the DSR in 2023 and the National Defense Strategy in 2024, that Australia's priority is its northern approaches, going from the Eastern Indian Ocean, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands. But that being said, as you mentioned, Lauren, huge opportunities and huge interest, because whatever happens in Northeast Asia, given our trade relationship and the interconnected dynamics of the security environment, whatever happens in Northeast Asia matters to Australia. And I think one area that has been growing and that offers opportunities is discussions, albeit very gradual, on a reciprocal access arrangement. Now, Australia and Japan have already agreed to this, and it did take almost a decade or more to actually get that lifted off the ground. And that is both, it's a huge signal of commitment to Australia's security cooperation in Northeast Asia, but also it's actually boosting interoperable and allowing Japanese F-35s to come to visit Australia and vice versa. So I think of a similar arrangement, not just for the sake because it's been done with Japan, but because Korea is such a critical hotspot for the region, and given Australia's developing capabilities in that area and rising defense spending, I think that would be a really important point to really develop on. Of course, Australian assets that are in Japan can be transitioned to the Korean Peninsula, but I think in terms of political signaling and commitment, and also Korea's growing role to take on a much broader security role in the Indo-Pacific, I think a reciprocal access arrangement, which has been in discussions, including under the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, but during progressive periods, it's kind of gone under the radar. But this administration is different, and EJ Mung's talked about, as Hannah was mentioning, pragmatism. I think there are opportunities here where Australia can play a much more direct role in the region, and I think we should really welcome or consider those options. Thank you.
Yeah. And then Linju, from the Korean side, how is Korea viewing the further engagement of Australia on the Korean Peninsula issues? Although, as Kester said, there's much more room to grow there.
Definitely agree to what Kester and Lauren just mentioned. And I think in current America First approach, that gives more room for Australia and South Korea to build more mature bilateral relationship, and maybe one of the biggest tech area would be UNC. And I know Australia is advancing some strategic shifts in terms of UNC, and in that means that Australia could be more actively working on Korea's contingency or other contingency areas in the region. So um that to me, that part is a little bit of more to go on, but definitely more room for the two countries to work together in some contingency areas. And like Kester said, I agree that um, there are a lot more rooms for cooperate or jointly collaborate on that matter. So yeah.
And then Hannah on the growing Korean and Australian production.
Um, I think it's a really good sign that Australia has made a statement that they will be more engaging with the North Korea issues, just because, based on my memory and my knowledge, Australia, even though Australia has been backing up any UN decision on sanctions with the North Korea, there wasn't really I would say, something standing out, something action that stands out about what their detailed approach is with the North Korea. So it is definitely a good signal that Australia will be more engaged with the peninsula itself, than the level that they're used to be. Yeah, and also I remember someone was saying about, like, given we're now in the era of America First, I think that's another good channel for Australia and Korea to even start to expand the discussion. It's just because I feel like most of the discussion, especially the meeting from the last week's APAC between President Lee and Albanese, was pretty much dominant on economic side. So I think UNC is a good channel, or a new channel, I would say, to discuss about security related issues, and potentially, like, it could be a driveway to develop the trilateral security cooperation as we're talking about it today.
Thank you so much. And I think we could continue discussion for another hour, but unfortunately, we are heading to the end of our time. And so I'd like to just thank you all once again for joining us and participating in this project. Again, there was multiple workshops behind the scenes, much communication amongst the next generation experts. And this is not the end of the next generation agenda. This is not the end of this group. And I just want to thank you all so much for all of your contributions. And I'll turn it over to Marcus to close for us now.
All right, thanks so much, Lauren. No, this is absolutely a great discussion. You're right. I think we can go on for hours on this. So it's really exciting to see this conversation, and just based on what we heard, I want to emphasize that despite some differences in the national security threat perspective and the priorities among the three countries, I really see in this group there's much more in common than divergent in this rising now generation or next generation in terms of their views. And I think the need and the overall opportunity for expanded security cooperation among the three countries is quite clear. And so, despite the clear shared awareness of the growing threats in the region, the world, particularly from the Russia, China, North Korea cooperation, I also appreciated that there was a lot of optimism from these next generation thinkers that they brought to this project. The participants seem to challenge some of the pessimistic perspectives that you might see from a more, so let's say, curmudgeonly group. Things like the U.S. is trending toward retreat and isolationism, or South Korea is trending toward neutrality, or Australian domestic critiques about the prospects for AUKUS and how expensive the submarines are going to be. These sorts of things. And so this optimism, this fresh perspective, I think is really important. And we really heard, I think, a lot of interesting ideas in this session. One that really resonated with me was this potential to work together in developing shared approaches for dual-use technologies that have major implications for national security, like artificial intelligence. Another one was the discussion that touched on China's use of its leverage over critical minerals and rare earths, how to counter that, and what I took away was the potential here to really look as Australia to be a potential source for those South Korea and the United States to counter China's pressure on rare earths. And I also came away from the discussion thinking that trilateral cooperation going forward can really be expanded through greater involvement by a rising generation of younger leaders in the three countries to creatively build trilateral and multilateral security cooperation that goes beyond the primary bilateral focus. That's a legacy of this sort of hub and spoke model where you have the ROK-US alliance and the US-Australia alliance as being viewed as almost separate, and really as separate considerations. And so I found Hannah's last comment there on UNC potentially as a new channel to be interesting, and I'm excited to see what Lieutenant General Winter, as the new deputy commander for UN Command, is going to be able to do in part, not just to advance the mission of UNC, but having an Australian there in such a key position, working with Korean and US counterparts, how that can advance trilateral cooperation. So that having been said, we are out of time. So while this is the end of today's discussion, this is not the end of a larger strategic conversation. So be sure to check out the Atlantic Council's website at atlanticcouncil.org for forthcoming content and events from the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative, featuring experts, including the next generations of national security leaders. And so I'd like to thank Lauren on a really great job, and also thanks very much to our excellent panel of speakers for their time and insights, and to our audience for taking the time to watch and ask great questions. So, and thanks also to all those who joined online. We hope to see you at future events. Until next time.